The biggest impediment to actually putting that in place is not the tech itself, it's not the capability that is there, it's not the system, it's actually... And innovation is not just tech. People think of innovation and they think tech or systems. It's also about how are people thinking and how are they solving problems. Innovation is about the single biggest risk time for women in construction, the single biggest risk for the sector in losing women, qualified, skilled, experienced women, is actually...
Construction is under pressure, not only to deliver more infrastructure, but to deliver it with fewer people, tighter margins, rising expectations, and a workforce that is increasingly exhausted, stretched, and can be difficult to retain. Across the industry, the same conversations continue to surface. Productivity is slowing. Skills shortages are deepening. Projects are becoming even more complex, and many organisations are still trying to solve 21st century workforce challenges with leadership models built for a different era. Because the biggest risk facing construction may no longer be technical capability. It may be whether the industry can create workplaces where people actually want to stay, where leadership evolves beyond hierarchy and pressure, and where diverse thinking is encouraged, where psychologically safe teams perform better, and where inclusion is understood not as a social initiative, but as a critical driver of workforce sustainability, productivity, and long-term project performance. Cathryn Greville believes this shift is no longer optional. With a background spanning law, governance, regulation, and leadership advocacy, and through her work as CEO of NAWIC, Cathryn is helping reshape the industry conversation around what modern leadership now demands. Not blame, not division, but practical and evidence-based action. This is a conversation about the future of construction leadership, about what male allyship really means in practice, about how culture is shaped on project sites, inside leadership teams, and through everyday behaviours. And we're going to talk about why solving the industry's productivity and skills challenges will require a far greater focus on people. In this episode of Building Doors, we explore why inclusive leadership may become one of the most important commercial and cultural priorities facing construction over the next decade, and what organisations can practically do now to build inclusive and ultimately stronger, healthier, and higher performing workplaces. Welcome to the Building Doors podcast. Welcome to the Building Doors podcast.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here, Lauren.
Look, as you know, and we'd spoken about the episode before coming on, one of the things I always like to start with is why you decided to take on the role within the construction industry. So in your role with NAWIC at the moment, where did this all come from for you, or where did this desire to work within the industry in this space come from?
Great question. Look, I've been working in and around construction for decades, really. I'm a lawyer by background. I've worked in industry reform and regulation and sustainability, and I'm so passionate about creating an environment where everyone can succeed. And if you actually look at industries where that is most needed, construction and the built environment is really top of the list. So, you know, we build the places that people work, live and play. So we should be building those places with a diverse group of voices and diverse perspectives going into the actual building of them, and also in terms of the end user. We should be building for the whole community. So I think, building construction has such potential and also such untapped potential that I'm really, really keen to drive forward.
So where has it been? Why do you think we haven't got to that place yet? What are some of the barriers that we need to overcome thinking forward to get to that place where it is a more inclusive environment? We do have diversity and inclusion as just part of how we do projects and do business?
Look, I think in terms of how the industry operates, starting from the adversarial nature of which we start with, right from the tender stage or even concept design stage for projects, right through how we tender, how we procure services, how we contract, we're set up to be essentially, an adversarial process. And that doesn't work when you've got lots of different parties that are trying to work together to deliver a good quality project at the end of the day. Added to that, we're quite hierarchical in terms of how we operate. It's a system of command and control, especially in on-site capacities. And then, there are egos that go along with that, and we're not a particularly innovative industry in terms of looking at what we're doing and deciding if that's working and changing that. So I think there's a number of different systemic barriers there, none of which are insurmountable and, many of which are, readily solvable. We just need to be looking at what we're doing and really, take a long, hard look at how we could be doing things better and then put that into place.
And so one of the things we spoke about and are keen to walk away from going through this episode is looking at some of those things that we can change. I think everyone, we've acknowledged, and in past episodes it's been acknowledged that there's certainly room for improvement in the industry. But I think the opportunity now over the next decade, and I hope that we've made a lot of progress over the next decade, is to really fundamentally look at some of those systemic issues and what the solutions that are available that make a better future possible. So talk me through some of those that you see.
Yeah, great question. So many opportunities. And I think, at the heart of it, it comes down to people. So as a sector, we have been trying to solve the productivity crisis, the, lack of innovation, the procurement areas that aren't working, all without really centering the fact that all of those elements come together and it's people behind all of that. So I liken it to having the best project strategy or even sustainability strategy on the wall, but unless your people know and understand it and are energised behind it and can actually see the vision, you're not going to be able to achieve that. So when we look at where projects are falling down, really it's around, at the crux of it, it's around people. It might be leadership that isn't setting the vision that people can follow. It might be communication breaking down. It might be psychosocial safety elements are not there, particularly psychological safety, where people don't feel comfortable to raise things and therefore projects get to a stage where there's problems and things stop and there's, variation claims and then there's disputes because people aren't feeling that they can raise things at those earliest opportunities. So there's lots of different areas where we can be looking at right throughout the chain, but ultimately I think we need to start with people. We need to start with elevating what we need and what I would say inclusive leadership. I loved your intro. Everything in there is what I wholeheartedly believe, that if we can look at how we are literally leading the sector differently and really elevate that people element of it, we've got a really good chance of doing things remarkably differently and achieving, all of the billions of dollars in our pipeline that we're really struggling to achieve right now.
So let's talk about inclusive leadership. What are some of the things, because we talk about it a lot, and I think we've spoken in the past about that this within inclusive leadership does include obviously diversity as part of it, but it's more than a women's issue. This is inclusive leadership is a cultural shift. Tell me about what inclusive leadership is in your view.
Absolutely. I'm going to start answering this by talking about NAWIC. So the National Association of Women in Construction, we have women in our name. And we exist to really see women thrive in construction and the built environment sector. And that's through making sure we're recruiting more women, we're seeing them advance and we're seeing them stay. And that retention element is really critical. We'll come back to that. So as an organisation, we are here to make sure that women can succeed in our sector. But our actual organisational strategy is to see a sector that is equitable for everybody, because that is how we're going to achieve a better situation for women. So the great benefit of working around gender equity and making sure that women are able to come in and succeed and advance in the sector is that works for everybody. So where our mission is actually to collaboratively drive gender equity through culture change, and that's the culture change that captures all genders in the sector, all different backgrounds. So when we take that to inclusive leadership, what we're talking about is leadership where you're really enabling people to be, to really be great people on site, to be leaders who have the trust and the confidence of their team, who lead in a way where they are looking at who's at the table and they are looking for those gaps. We know, for example, that when you have women in leadership positions, that the situation changes, the outcomes change quite significantly in favour of that demographic. So there's a lot of benefits to having women at the table. When you get that to projects and, let's say, site-based roles, senior leadership on site, it's really about creating safe spaces where people can raise issues, as I said, make sure that they're working well with other people, that you've got that collaboration and that nature of teamwork actually happening on the site, that you're overcoming the egos and the structural issues that might otherwise pervade and see, not great outcomes at the end. And then when you're looking at workers day-to-day basis, they may not be in leadership roles, they may even be new entrants into the sector or as apprentices. You're looking at what are the behaviours that they are accepting as usual, as normal on site. So what are they walking past? That great saying of the standard that you walk past is the standard that you accept. I wholeheartedly believe that. So everyone needs to be looking at what they can be doing to make sure that the standard that you're setting is one that works for everybody and is actually one that creates, safe and happy workplaces. So we know people want to stay in workplaces where they're happy and they can succeed. So we all have a role to play in that. And that sort of encapsulates really that inclusive leadership component.
How will that help, or what are your thoughts around the linkage between that and that productivity gap? Is there much research, or are you seeing much of a link being discussed around how the inclusive leadership in solving some of those because I see a lot of the time people say, oh, well, it's crazy that, when we've got 50% of our workforce not being represented in the industry, like that there helps, at least helps that skills shortage issue. But then I also think it's even deeper than that. It's the driving the right behaviours that drive a more productive workforce and more profitable projects. Tell me more about the linkage between inclusive leadership and productivity.
100%. So firstly, that representation issue is one of the key issues, right? And we should have women building these great projects that we're doing, and also sharing in the economic benefits that come from a great career in construction and the built environment sector. In terms of the linkage, we know that businesses, for example, that have inclusive teams make better decisions 87% of the time, and they make them twice as fast. So if you're talking about productivity, having an inclusive culture is directly relevant to how productive your workplace can be and that project can be. And then when you look at other business outcomes, so for example, if you have inclusive teams and better represented teams, you actually stand a chance. You're twice as competitive as others in the market, and usually they've estimated up to 3 times better business outcomes overall. And there's huge benefits. In fact, when you're looking from a fiscal perspective, you can actually see the benefits of having inclusive cultures, having more women in leadership positions in terms of the bottom line of companies. So there's great study out of my home state of Western Australia. The Bank West Curtin Economics Centre did a study, and they were the first to actually prove a causal link between women in leadership and better business outcomes. So they looked at the impact of having women in leadership roles, in C-suite and senior leadership roles, and they looked at 6 different ways of looking at it, whether it's EBITDA or profit and calculations, and they came to the conclusion that if you have, the more women you have in leadership, the higher chance that you have of success. And the more, and that starts on a sliding scale. So you may start with 1 or 2 women in leadership and you have a better chance of success to start with. But as you grow that, the more women you have in the leadership team, the better chances of success that you have. So you can't say that gender equity and inclusion as a principle is not related to productivity or financial benefit or better outcomes for the industry. And then if you take it further and you look at the cost of not getting it right, the cost of having psychologically unsafe workplaces is huge. So we know, for example, when people leave, it costs us between, and you'll know this, between half of their salary up to possibly up to 3 times their salary. So that's the immediate cost of someone leaving your business to take account of. But there's this other cost which doesn't appear on balance sheets, and that's, are people actually safe? Are they doing their best work? Do you have high rates of absenteeism, or are people taking sick leave just to cope? So there's a lot of productivity in terms of how people are working. And we know that happy people who feel safe and confident actually make more productive workers. That's not rocket science, but it's hard to measure from a financial perspective. So there's lots of different elements about the productivity question, but ultimately productivity all comes back to people, right? I think there's this concept that productivity is about bringing the next innovation. That's how we're going to improve our productivity. And I've just come from a conference where we were looking at AI and tech in great detail. And ultimately it came down to, if you are trying to implement new tech, for example, or even AI, the biggest impediment to actually putting that in place is not the tech itself. It's not the capability that is there. It's not the system. It's actually whether people are able to implement that. So whether they believe in it firstly, whether they understand it, whether they have the skills to put it in place, but also whether they're feeling safe that that's something that they can do. So, we see workers working around technology that's brought in all the time. A lot of that comes back to people, and such potential in the people that we have, and retaining them, retaining all that skill, culture and corporate knowledge, and making sure that we see people, succeeding and staying in the sector, even if they're moving across projects as they start and end.
I love that you linked it with innovation, because the other thing is, when we talk about psychological safety, you and I both know, so it's just even from a neuroscience point of view, right? So if people are feeling in a threat state, right, the amygdala floods, right, they're constantly in a defensive mode. That is not activating the part of the brain that can innovate, that can do the things that you want to be, because AI is changing the landscape 100%. But AI is not the solution, because ultimately, when we talk about systems, data in, data out, right? So if you put garbage data in, then you pull the reports, doesn't matter how great the technology is, if no one's using it, or secondly, people are not using it properly, don't understand it, don't buy into it, then you're never going to get the great outcome that's even possible with the integration of AI. So you hit the nail on the head there, I feel, talking about the linkage between, and it fascinates me, the linkage between, if you have a psychologically safe workplace where people feel they can show up, where people feel they can give their opinions, ideas, solutions, innovations, they link. My question to you as well is, around innovation. So if we look at, say, we're looking at inclusive leadership, and then we look at productivity outcomes, what about innovation? Tell me more around what you're seeing there that is possible from a more inclusive workplace.
Well, firstly, you bring more diverse voices to the table, different perspectives, those that have come from different backgrounds, whether it's different genders, different other protected characteristics, age, disability, neurodivergence, you name it, cultural backgrounds, different language speakers. You put them into the mix in terms of innovation, and we know that diverse teams with people from different backgrounds actually make more innovative decisions. So they bring more to the table than if we all sit around with a group of people that have similar education, similar background, similar experiences. We're going to come up with a bit of groupthink. So the more diverse voices you have, the more likely you are to actually come up with innovative solutions to things. And innovation is not just tech. People think of innovation and they think tech or systems. It's also about how are people thinking and how are they solving problems. Innovation is about solving problems, essentially. And you need people in the mix to be, at least feeding into that. Even where you're using AI, you need people to be understanding the output, questioning that, not taking that for gospel, and using that as a tool to sort of help get there. So the diversity of perspectives is one aspect of innovation. And then you've touched on it in terms of psychological safety. That is so critical. People don't start thinking, if they're worried about keeping their job or just getting through the day, they're not thinking about going above and beyond their role. And most innovation is, bar a couple of positions that might be innovation officers in organisations, innovation is this expectation on top of your day job. And often it's expected for people to come up with ideas on top of what they need to do. So unless you've got that safety, unless you've got some flexibility around how you're operating, unless you're accounting for people's different working methods, some people might come up with their most innovative ideas in the drive on the way home or, in the shower or when they're off doing their sport. So, it's this expectation that we all are there at the same time of the day and we're expected to come up with these ideas at the same time. We need to be realistic around how innovative ideas actually come up and then where are the opportunities for people to raise those. So if you have a leader who is really open about it, who comes in and says, oh, look, I got that one wrong. I made a mistake. I overlooked that. Can you help me solve it? Or I've got this idea, I really want to sense check it with you, and actually makes the most of the skill set around them. That's a good example of inclusive leadership too, by the way. That is going to create a much more innovative culture where people feel safe to raise their silly idea. And it's something I say to my staff and have throughout my career. There's no silly question. Yeah. I'm a lawyer. I ask a lot of questions, but there's no silly question except the one that you didn't ask. Because quite often people have ideas, but they don't feel that they can raise them or they don't want to be called out for being silly. So that environment around being able to raise ideas is really critical. And I think innovation is one area where more voices, but also the better the leadership you have, whether it's, at site base, whether it's in senior leadership roles, at different office environments throughout the sector, the sky's the limit in terms of what people are actually capable of. Pull the gloves off, let them be as highly skilled and input into what we're doing as much as possible.
And one of the things you sort of touched on there, which I think is really interesting, is that link between, because one of the things clients are talking about at the moment a lot, particularly in the infrastructure space, is collaborative contracting and some of the behaviour shifts that they're wanting to see and how they partner with the contractors on the immense amount of work we've got to deliver leading up to the Olympics. So my other thought process, and one thing I wanted to talk to you about, is there is, again, a byproduct of more inclusive, more psychological safety, all of these linking together in then building more a collaborative model that allows, communication to go backwards and forwards between the client and the contractor, because people have said to me in the past, there can sometimes be barriers on projects in tenders where it stipulates this person must be on site full time. And then that's really hard when we talk about, some of those sites starts at 6:30. Daycares sometimes don't open until then. And we've talked about this before. Tell me about some of the invisible barriers and things like that we as an industry need to help to overcome that will result in more collaborative, more systemic change with clients too.
Firstly, I'll touch on the collaborative contracts because I'm a big believer in the way that we actually structure our projects can be a whole lot better.
Yep.
And that comes from years of experience on the other side, litigating, seeing, representing one client or a couple of clients and achieving a result for them, but actually, the same issues keep coming up over and over again. So there's a huge potential there. There are examples of collaborative contracts, and really it's about getting the parties together at the start and working out what is everyone's role, how do we solve this together, and really, can we not share the profit and the risk better than we currently are? Because at the moment we push all the risk down the chain onto the lowest, the smallest businesses, the lowest organisations in the supply chain, and that's why we see so many insolvencies in the sector. So we're not helping ourselves by pushing out our supply chain. We really need to be looking at that risk component. But there's a whole podcast in discussing the tendering and procurement and contracting models that we currently use. But when you actually take that down to what the experience is for people on the site, you've mentioned, we are an industry that expects people to be on site before schools open, before school opens, before childcare opens. And often people in construction also have partners who are very often in construction or related fields. So it's not always the case where you have someone who has a partner who has shift work. And of course, that you're never going to have that option if you've got single parent families and so on. We need to be looking at that flexibility. It's not actually hard to do things like job share where you have, an early start and an early finish, or late start and later finish. There's lots of opportunities. Flexibility is not just about part-time, and it's not just about work from home. People often think about that and they say, construction, we can't work from home in many jobs. there's a lot more in flexibility than just those things. That's just scratching at the surface. So many different options. Ultimately, it comes down to let's talk to the people and find out what they need. And inclusive leaders do this. They don't assume that someone, because they're a mother or a father or, grandparent or so on, that what they need is a certain thing. They go and talk to them and find out. Because every family is different. Every, worker is different in terms of how they work best. And ultimately we need to be really, drilling into understanding our people better and what makes them work best, and then trying to implement that as much as possible. Now, that's not saying everyone's going to get everything that they want, but if you don't have that conversation going and you don't understand what your people need, how are you going to be able to create the environment for them to do their best work?
And I think as well, what we're starting to see more now than ever is two-parent working incomes and households where we've driven from a socio-economic point of view more engagement from women in the workforce. But for that to happen and for that to be a possibility as well, we need to improve it for men. And where we've talked about this before, but NAWIC, and you touched on it at the start, which is really important, it's about culture shift. And that culture shift helps dads that want to be more involved, that want to do drop off or pick up whenever they need to, a couple of days a week, or whatever that looks like. And I think you really touched on something that I'm passionate about as well, is we must not assume that we think we know what flexibility means. Once had a client in construction, brand new client, that said to me, we can't do flexibility in this area because we don't believe in working from home. And I said, whoa, did we even talk about that was flexibility? So it's also looking at that unconscious bias that we have around what flexibility is, because flexibility, as you just spoke about, it can be, I need to finish a bit earlier one day to do pickup. It might be, hey, can somebody record the pre-start for this day because I do drop off on this day and I will. How can we? How can we needs to be one of the questions we ask, enable it.
Absolutely. And I love, so in some government departments, they've started this where they look at that. If not, why not? So they start from the premise that everyone has access to flexibility, and it's not gendered, just as you've said. Everyone has access to it. If there's some way and then the organisation has to work out, why can't we deliver that? Or why can't we deliver at least part of that? So rather than, I think we still as an industry see someone asking for flexibility, whatever that is, even if it's late start, early finish, I need to leave one day a week at this time, we look at that as if we're giving that person some special treatment. That's not what it's about. It's about getting a team that's working the best that they possibly can and getting individuals, getting the best value out of your staff. And if they need to go and do that pickup, or they need to go and care for their elderly parent on these days, surely we can work out a way to accommodate that. So there's a lot around that. On the caring aspect, really interestingly, NAWIC did some research with the University of Sydney and it came out last year, and it was around parental leave, pregnancy, parental leave and return to work. And what we found was the single biggest risk time for women in construction, the single biggest risk for the sector in losing women, qualified, skilled, experienced women, is actually when they become pregnant. And that is a systemic issue. If we're not factoring in that women may become pregnant and therefore we need to be able to factor in how do we manage pregnancy and return to work. So we were finding that women weren't coming back to work, or when they did, they gave it a try and it just didn't work. And there's a fundamental shift needed there around how we're actually accommodating people coming back into the workforce. And one of the key areas and ways to improve that was to actually get more men taking parental leave, because we need this, caring is a family responsibility. It's a parenting responsibility. It's not gendered. So yes, women will often take more time at the start because they're delivering the babies, but actually not every woman wants to have an extended time off. I was speaking to someone just the other day, they wanted 6 weeks off and to come back to work. We need to be having those discussions and not assuming. And then respecting the choices that are made and understanding that that is a personal choice and it's not something to be judged. It's just something that families need to work out. But if we can open the gates for men to take parental leave, then we stand a much better chance of getting women back in after they have had their babies and back in and continuing on their career path, and really normalising caring as a family responsibility across genders.
And I think that the interesting cultural shift you're seeing right now is in many environments in construction in the past, some of the senior leaders that's sitting in those GM, CEO, like the senior positions, they had a wife at home. I'm going to call it out because it's constantly expressed to me is that person is then viewing my situation from their own personal bias, experience, subjective view on how it works, but that's not my reality. That's not my reality because right now we don't have family support. We're both working. We met through work and now we're both project managers. We're both in careers in our own right. So this is the interesting shift I'm seeing as well. And one of the things organisations also need to consider is this is a retention issue too. If you do this right, I promise you, 80% of the conversations I'm having where people are keeping people in companies, it's not money. Everyone says all the time, it's actually culture. It is the culture. It's how they buy into the teams they're in, but also some of those things that build that retention are the very things you just spoke about.
And how well you feel supported. You know, being able to offer flexibility, for example, to people can see that the reward for that from a business perspective, you know, it delivers tenfold.
Yes.
Because you get loyalty that you otherwise wouldn't build. You have people that are willing to flex with you as well. Sometimes the business needs extra hands on deck at different times. If you've given a person flexibility, my experience is they will move heaven and earth to help out the business and help out the team when that's needed because it's a two-way street. So, yeah, 100%. There's a lot around the flexibility aspect, and we have really successful projects in construction that have employed flexibility and time for life and so on through the CICT Culture in Construction Task Force. So we have good examples of being able to do things differently, and the sky didn't fall in. In fact, people psychological safety element and the flexibility element and people's experience of work improved hugely. So we know how to get this right. It's about making sure that we are structuring what we're doing and making sure that we're also upskilling our managers who are managing people to be able to do this. Because what I see often is we'll have a CEO or a board that are really committed to something, but that's not necessarily flowing down to the people who are actually doing the management on a day-to-day basis. Or who are ultimately making the decision as to whether that flexible work arrangement request is actually agreed to or not, or whether, you know, it's just off the table. So that training, that upskilling of people around what this means, and also the importance of the role that they play in the experience of others in the workplace. You know, we can't go to work. It's 2026. We can't go to work expecting that we just do our own thing and, you know, and it doesn't matter the impact that we have on others. We have to be going into the workplace and working with teams and across teams and realising that we have a huge impact on other people's experience of work, and we can make things so much better for other people with these small tweaks and considerations of what those other people's needs are. Absolutely.
One of the things that you've touched on before, and I think we're kind of getting towards talking about that now, is the male allyship side as well, and the Male Allies program and some of the work in that space that can, I guess, you know, infiltrate other levels all across the business. Tell me a bit more about that, those programs, and where that initiative, you know, came from.
So our Allyship in Action project, which is a large federal grant-funded project funded by the Building Women's Careers Grant Program, we were awarded that early last year. It's a huge $5 million project where we've got 4 streams within it. And it's a culture change, a culture transformation project. And it's really geared towards making sure that we're upskilling and providing resources and support right across the sector, not just to senior leaders, but right through to people even at that early entrance stage. So the first element is a male allyship training course and program around engaging men as allies. And that's out now. We've got our industry challenge running at the moment where we're trying to get as many organisations hooked up to really seeing this as important and getting as many men through that program as well. women, and non-binary people. It's also open to you. We are focusing on getting as many men through that, but as you would expect, we also have loads of other people who want to do that program as well. So it's male allyship, and that's really about it draws from the data. We know that men in allyship programs who actually are trained and understand the perspectives of others coming through that type of training and resource development, they're actually 3 times more likely to promote gender equality. So we know that if we give men the tools to be able to make this culture change shift with us, we've got so many men who are signed up and who really want to be allies and really want to drive the change. But what we perhaps as an industry haven't done before, and I'd say across industries, is we haven't necessarily pitched that towards what men need to be able to come in. So our program is for men who may not have ever heard of what male allyship is, or may have a very rudimentary understanding of what that means. They may not know what to do. They may want to do something, and they may have found themselves in situations where they wish they had stepped in, and in hindsight they would have done it differently, but they didn't have the skills and the tools, and perhaps they didn't have the sort of authority to do that at the time. They didn't understand what they were allowed to do or how they would do it effectively. So that's a whole training program to engage men, and we're dealing with men who are, some people have been allies for many years, others are very much at the start of their journey, and that's okay. It's a program for everybody. So we will meet men where they are on their understanding of equity and inclusion, and help build their allyship skills. The second program we're running in that is a site-based allyship program, and that's really building off the male allyship program, but it's getting to sites, and we're actually running pilots with people, with men on site, to understand what goes through their mind, how would they engage with this, to really understand the male psyche and what we need to actually engage men in site-based roles. Because construction sites are quite different from an office environment or other sites. And, globally, we haven't managed to really hit the nail on the head with this yet. So we're taking a different approach rather than designing the subject matter and working out a way to get that onto site. We're going to site and speaking to the men to understand and then build a program that meets their needs. So it may well, and I expect it will look quite different to what else is out there, and it's designed to do that. So it's really getting to the heart of the pressures and the challenges of on-site roles, really, that history, that ego that's wrapped up in how we operate on site, and, really breaking that down to create programs and resources that help site-based, culture. The third element is a sponsorship program, which it's for women, but it's actually geared around teaching men how to be active sponsors and sponsorship rather than mentoring or coaching. So quite distinct. And then the fourth element is a cultural ambassadors program, which is gender agnostic. So it's for men, women, non-binary people, everyone we want to teach them about all the different areas of inclusive leadership and inclusive culture making, and really build people's confidence and competence to be able to address issues as they see them on the ground every day. Because we know that that's where culture is built. We can have all the statements at the top, we can have policies, we can have procedures, but you have to get it into ground level. So we want to give everyone the baseline understanding of what good looks like and what their role is in actually driving that forward. And I think it's quite empowering because we're working with 4 industry partners, one of whom is Holmes Glen Institute, which is a TAFE in Victoria. And we're really working with them to understand how do we need to design this to meet the needs of the trainers, the lecturers who are actually seeing that next cohort coming through, and also the apprentices and trainees who are coming into the sector. So they come in with a starting point of understanding what good looks like, and they're not so influenced by the first manager that they had that may not actually really get this right. And the other industry partners we're working with is CPB Contractors, ADCO Constructions, and the Australian Workers Union. So it's a true cross-industry tripartite opportunity. So industry, union, government, and of course NAWIC as the experts in what shifts the dial from a cultural perspective.
So when you look at some of the work that's been done so far, what are some of the case studies or any particular wins or success stories that you can share with people so, we can start to see some of the results coming out of these or early results from these programs?
Early result is very early. So we're 1 year into a 3-year program, and we really are we're sort of building the plane as we fly it in some ways. But we've had some really early wins from our male allyship program. We're getting feedback from both men and businesses about how it's shifting their thinking and how it's actually moving them from being almost sort of passive in certain situations to understanding that they have a role to play and giving them confidence that they can play that role. So we'll have some data on that coming out as the project progresses. But generally across the sector, there's some great examples of doing things differently. I've worked with businesses in the UK, for example, before I moved back to Australia to take on this role. And we were at the stage of really embedding inclusivity and equity targets through contract models, actually, right through into projects. And there's an enormous amount that can be driven when, as a client or as a head contractor, you really signal to the market that you're taking this seriously and it's important to you. And then it comes through from your tenders into your contracts and into how people might tender for your work. Making sure that those requirements are weighted. It's not just a nice to have. And then actually the culture that you're setting through your project and the engagement of subcontractors that actually meet those values and want to drive that with you as well.
Are we doing that at a government? I'm genuinely asking because I'm curious. Are we doing that at a government level right now? Like, we know we've got the Olympic pipeline coming. We know we've got all this infrastructure work. Do we do that right now at a government level, or is that something that they're considering for the future as well, for the tendering and procurement? Because we kind of touched on that, and that's something I'm fascinated by because it's something that the contractors are talking about all the time. Oh, we can't do that because in the tender we need to have this role on site. Oh, we can't do that because in the tender. And so it's often, I'm not saying blamed because I don't think it's that's quite a harsh word, but it's often linked or claimed to be causal back to the client. So what about that level as well?
So yes, there are pockets of this being done well in government, but we are really advocating for a much more broad spread adoption. So, for example, there's a great New South Wales project, the Bank Street Park project, which has been issued with a tender from Infrastructure New South Wales. They were expecting 50% female representation through that project. So not in office roles, across the entire project. So that's a huge signal to the market that they are really taking it seriously and they want to see increase of women in all different roles on that project. And B6 WAPAC is delivering that. And I've heard Mark Baker speak about this and why they went in for the tender. And he said they fundamentally believe that is where we need to be moving and that they wholeheartedly believe in the cause. So they were willing to put their hat in the ring and be, I guess, the first cab off the rank to try and do something that is quite remarkable, given that currently we're sitting at 3.4% of women in trades and 12.4% overall. So if we can achieve 50% on a project, or even if we don't achieve that full number, if we get partway there and higher numbers than our current representation, that's a huge success story and something that I'm sure there'll be lots of learnings that come out of that project that can then be shared with the industry for future projects. We've got the ACT government has committed to implementing the culture standard, which is the work that came out of the CICT's work. So that is looking at flexibility, at time for life, at not overworking people. So it's got a real safety and a wellbeing aspect in there. And that is something that other governments are also considering and certainly something we're advocating strongly for. So there are pockets where it is certainly happening. There's other opportunities where I don't think it's being seen as the huge opportunity it is. Yeah. Because when you talk, and having just come from several different forums in the last month or so, the biggest issue facing the sector right now is workforce. How are we going to get enough people and the right people with the right skills to be able to deliver this huge pipeline of work? And that's, obviously acute in Queensland with the Olympics, but at the same time we've got housing targets and we've got, huge expectations around data centres. We've got defence work. We've got, standard infrastructure, roads and rail projects that need to happen to connect communities and that have been on the cards for a while. So with all of these different projects happening, all around Australia at the same time, workforce is not going away. That workforce crisis, as someone, referred to it last week, that really needs to be, we need to be looking at how we're engaging people, who we're engaging. if we're not engaging, 50% of the population, we're missing a huge opportunity there. And equally, there's huge opportunities in other underrepresented groups, minoritized groups in the market as well. So lots of opportunity. If any governments are looking to do this, any clients, private sector clients as well, we would love to speak to them at NAWIC, because we have lots of great ideas that we're working on as to how this can be implemented more broadly.
I think it's a really interesting shift as well, where there's this potential and possibility for clients to look at it and partner now. And I also think the interesting part will be the early adopters. So I think a lot of the time, rather than waiting for it to become mandatory or part of a tender, is to start to think about now what you can do to get involved and be one of the first early adopters rather than lagging or,
yes.
In this space too.
Yes, and that's a huge opportunity, because those that are going to be early adopters are going to be the ones that, for us, the ones that really see inclusion as a key business and productivity and, fiscal responsibility, not just a diversity initiative. Diversity is about having lots of different people and voices at the table. Inclusion is really about making sure that all of those voices actually have a proper voice and have a place and feel that they are valued and can contribute to what we're trying to achieve. So there's a difference between the two. Melding that together is where we really need to be. And those organisations that do that are going to stand a lot better on the workforce front as well. So if we just look at Gen Z, for example, I'm sure you would work with a lot of Gen Zs. So we know that the QBCC gave us some stats on this. There's a huge number of people, 1/3 of building licensees in Queensland are due to retire. They're over the age of 50 and they're due to retire in the next, say, decade. We don't have enough younger people coming in and taking building licenses. We certainly don't have enough women. There's hardly any women in those stats. So we know that we've got this workforce that is ageing. We're going to have to be drawing from our pool of young people, and we want to create the next generation. Whereas when you look at what Gen Z actually value, there's that great World Economic Forum report that says Gen Z workers are looking for organisations that are inclusive, nurture their well-being and give them career growth and career opportunity. So they want to work in workplaces that are nice to work in. And in fact, that report said that about half of Gen Z workers wouldn't work in an organisation that doesn't have diverse leadership. And then a further, I think it was 50% said that they are looking at sustainability reports as they're deciding whether to apply for an organisation. And of course, sustainability includes people element of sustainability. It's across almost most of the Sustainable Development Goals, but certainly a driver for many of them. And then 30% of Gen Z workers or prospective workforce wouldn't accept a job in an organisation that can't demonstrate its EDI track record, its equity, diversity, inclusion track record. So we've got this whole cohort of younger people coming through who value sustainability, who value the workplace environments that they're going into, and they value diversity and inclusion. And if you're not actually building that into how you're running your business, you're not even going to know, firstly, many of the great, skilled, talented people that aren't going to apply to your organisation because you'll never hear from them. And secondly, you're not going to be able to retain those that are coming in with those expectations, and those expectations aren't being met. So I can't stress strongly enough about how much equity and inclusion should be fundamental to how your organisation is looking at driving, productivity, workforce, risk, safety. We haven't touched on safety, but there's a huge element here around safety as well. And I have to point out that the construction industry is one of the worst industries for safety in terms of sexual harassment and harassment bullying. We've seen that with the CFMEU behaviour that's been exposed recently. It's not an industry that people look at and automatically think that is a safe industry to send my son or daughter or young person into. So we have to be realistic about what we're actually offering. They're not simple, but they're simple, but probably difficult to implement in some ways. But they require real leadership to implement changes that will really switch up where your talent pool's coming from and just how much opportunity you have and become an employer of choice for lots of different generations of people.
And I would encourage leaders that have come through a different era of construction to question your own unconscious bias. So, I see this a lot and I also encourage, I think people and culture and resourcing and talent acquisition have a massive role to play in not being yes people and in actually being part of the solution, and instead of just going with the status quo, also challenging some of those biases and becoming an industry advocate as well. Because there is such potential when you are, looking at your workforce plan, when you are looking at your resourcing strategy, when you're looking at your tendering, to really think about what roles, what else is possible. Can we do job share here? Could someone do this role part remotely? My own team, we have a job share. We have somebody that works largely remotely because of a medical condition. Honestly, like the best talent may not exist within these constraints that you are putting on it. One of my clients was looking for someone full-time, hired someone on 4 days a week, wasn't something they'd considered. She's been promoted twice. These little stories, and they're just a couple of examples, are well within the industry. It's happening.
Yeah.
But if we don't actively check our biases when we go to market, when we look at the language we use and how we shape a role, when we look at the conversation we have with people, letting them feel like flexibility is an option, being open to job share, thinking about what might be possible is going to be, I can't stress enough as you're talking about this, that also I really want to see a strong band together from people and culture and resourcing teams to be a part of the solution too.
Absolutely. And it's interesting when we talk about unconscious bias, because the research shows us that we've sort of moved it on a little step there, that it comes back to inclusive leadership, because what we need is upstanders, people who are actually willing. So they recognise we all have bias, so we're not trying to eliminate all of our biases.
We're all going to have it.
We all have
exactly.
biases. And many of our biases aren't unconscious. So that unconscious bias training will allow you to see your bias where you may not have seen it before. But this is where we really dive into the allyship, the ambassadorship, the sponsorship programs that we're developing. It's taking those people from recognising bias to actually doing something about it.
Yes.
But coming back to the recruitment question, there is so much opportunity there. If you tweaks of wording in job ads make a huge, enormous difference.
Yes.
I was just reading just actually this week, there's a company in Perth that I know of, and they put out a job ad advertising for a tradie that was work hours within school hours, and they got thousands of applications. They were blown away with how many applications they had. And then, being the leaders and the business that they are, they went through and they responded to each and every one of them. And when you look at in Victoria, they had the all-women boring team, tunnel boring team as part of their suburban rail project. And that team is led by a woman. They put out an ad for 12 positions for women, and it was very clear they were for women, and they had 800 applicants for those 12 positions. And what that shows is when you take away the barriers of things like, in 2026, people are still worried about, am I going to get PPE that fits me? Am I going to be in a safe environment? Am I going to have a bathroom to use when I'm actually on site? That's a huge issue we're still advocating for in 2026. Is this a safe environment? Am I going to learn new skills here? Is it going to be safe for me to come in and not necessarily have those skills? And for those roles, they said, we will take people from a variety of backgrounds. We will train you. There's all this support there. So when people come back to saying, where do I get the women? There's not enough women who want to do this work. Tunnel boring, that's boots on the ground inside tunnels, as dirty as it gets, construction work, right?
Yeah.
That plenty of women who want to do the work. It's about creating the environment where we actually, we make it attractive and something that's possible, and, around the caring hours and things like that as well. And we should be able to attract and retain people with disabilities, those with neurodivergence who may just need slight tweaks to the way that we do things. We have a legal responsibility there in terms of making sure that we're A, not discriminating, but B, providing support to those that need it. But also think about that talent that we would be missing out on. The person that you just mentioned. That's untapped pool of talent.
100%.
And when we come back to that innovation question and that productivity question, it really excites me about how many great perspectives and how many great skills are out there, that if we look at doing our recruitment differently and we look at managing our teams differently, we can bring in so many more people that have a different perspective and help us solve these big problems. we build some pretty colossal structures. It's crazy that we're only using a very small portion of the community perspective to do that.
It's so true. And I think I really like what you spoke about there, and when we talk about advocacy, because I think you're right. So the training initially was, well, let's be aware of unconscious bias so you know what your bias is. But it's like, well, it's not enough now to be aware of it. It's about also having the confidence to call someone else out and respectfully, if there are barriers there, to say, why not? If someone says this role needs to be full-time on site, why? Is there another way? How else can we shape that? And I think that this requires us, this is the stretch that I think is going to challenge some people, but I think we'll also, when we start to see with these programs and start to see some of the systemic change happening at a site level and things like that, and then also enablers like toilets and some of the very basic fundamentals that we need, that's when it's going to get so much easier. I remember we deal with transport too, and a transport client advertised some specific bus driving positions for school hours, again, inundated as well. Also couldn't find enough bus drivers, and lobbied and created some change whereby there was a pathway from truck drivers to come into becoming bus drivers. So obviously truck drivers, if it wasn't working with flexibility, like these
long
are the great things that we can learn from industries adjacent to us as well. Not to mention also considering where is the possibility of bringing in transferable skills from adjacent industries. There are a lot of women in and, neurodivergent, all people from other industries that can come in to construction if we make it possible.
And you must see this in your role as well, that we're not as an industry very good at hiring for transferable skills. We tend actually, as an industry, construction is one of the last bastions that actually still hires predominantly through word of mouth or who you know. So whilst even when we advertise roles, often the people that are getting them are those that have already worked with the people before or are known by someone. And very often they look and sound and have very similar backgrounds to the people that are hiring them. And what we're trying to do is really shift that up and make sure that we've got diverse candidate pools, that we're actually looking at what are the skill sets and looking outside of construction and the built environment sector and looking to other sectors, as you've mentioned, like transport and others, where manufacturing and other caring industries as well, where you actually see there's great skills here in managing teams, in understanding problems, in dealing with issues on the fly, that, they are transferable skills. And someone doesn't need to have come through the traditional path necessarily to be able to add value. And there will be roles where there is a specific career progression for whatever reason, but equally there's as many roles out there in construction where that's not the case. And we are still hiring the same people. And what do they say? We're hiring the same people with the same experience and expecting something different. And we really need to be more open about who we're hiring and how we're doing that and how we're enabling them to succeed.
And we need to think about there's success stories across the different levels. So if look at hiring even within my team, one of my staff hired in submissions, hired in someone from an NDIS background that had managed the NDIS process, had never worked in construction, a young girl in an early entry job. And they said she's phenomenal. Why? Because the transferable skills was she's managed multiple caseloads in an NDIS environment. Then she's coming in and working in and managing multiple tenders, gathering information. The skills are very similar. But then even at the CEO level, I recruited with a client, a CEO into a professional services environment, but in infrastructure that didn't have your traditional background infrastructure, had worked in IT, had worked in professional services, Telstra, all these different organisations. What has the result been? Astronomical improvements.
Yeah.
A re-energisation of the business as well. So it's not just something we're saying, from the perspective of opening up the talent pool to enable more people these opportunities. It could also catapult your performance because someone's coming in with a different view, they don't have the biases, they haven't been shaped by the way things have always been done, and that can open a lot of opportunity too.
Yeah, absolutely. That fresh set of eyes and almost the no barriers. I know from, doing many secondments through government roles, for example, earlier in my career, coming in to an area where you haven't worked in that area before and everyone in your team is set in the way of this is how we did it, it's quite liberating because, you're the first person to be actually looking, in some cases, looking at the legislation in detail and saying, what you're telling me you have to do, no, that's not what it says here, but that's what someone 20, 30 years ago
told them,
understood from it. And that's this whole process and procedure built around that. So, coming in with different perspective is hugely, hugely valuable. And, especially I'd say in a CEO role where you've got a team of specialists and experts who are reporting to you, who will know the ins and the outs of some of those areas of detail that you don't know yet, is absolutely hugely valuable. I'm a leader who strongly believes in hiring the best people and then getting out of their way and letting them do their best work. So
absolutely.
I think if you apply that, then you have a much broader candidate pool to draw from.
So with all the work that you're doing in your role now, all the work through NAWIC, what's the legacy you hope to leave in the industry, in the world, I suppose, from your life's work?
Oh, good question. I want the sector, and I'm talking about construction and built environment and industry generally, to be probably two things. One where a much broader range of people can come in and really succeed, and we can have the benefit of what that diversity and different perspectives brings, but also that we actually see the full potential of the industries that we're working in because they have that different approach. So I think really energised to see where the inclusive leadership discussion goes and where business leaders really take this. And I guess, my job is to work with them and really help them drive that forward.
Excellent. And how can people, before we go into the rocket round, how can people get involved? If they listen to this episode, they want to get involved, what are some of the ways that they can take action?
Brilliant. So NAWIC is a national organisation. We have boots on the ground in every state and territory around Australia. So I would say join up as a member, find your local chapter. There is one in every major city around Australia, and we also have regional presence as well, and get involved. So you can go to our website, nawic.com.au, to find out more, and also to sign up for our industry challenge for our male allyship project and many other initiatives that we've got underway as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And rocket round. I cannot finish without the rocket round because I've been changing it up lately because I got bored asking the same questions all the time. So I started asking different ones. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Favourite holiday destination?
Ooh, Fiji. It's where I got married.
Oh, I love that. We love Fiji too. We're going there next year. And what makes you feel like you're home?
I feel like I'm home. My family. Yeah. My hubby and kids and our
dog.
And our puppy.
Do you have a dog?
Yes, we have it. We have a puppy, Sammy.
What kind of dog?
Cocker spaniel.
Okay. Are cocker spaniels well behaved as puppies?
Depends on who you ask. He's 5 months old. We're trying to get there. He's not yet. But but he's very cute.
Yeah.
And we're at that stage of making sure he doesn't rule the household.
If you figure it out, teach me, because we got a Moodle that definitely tested us. She'll jump on was teaching it to jump on the tables. Like, get a puppy into the household and it'll teach you. We've done puppy preschool and everything like that, but they can certainly keep you on your toes in those puppy stages. Sounds like you've got the similar scenario.
Yes. He's very adorable, which means he gets away with far too much, but our kids are helping train him. So
yes, that's awesome.
We will get there.
You will. You look back now and they're puppies, and you look back in a few years and much more chilled and things like that, and you forget the puppy phase until you get another puppy. Well, thank you so much for coming on as a guest. Really enjoyed the chat, and I really encourage people to get behind the movement, be a part of the change, get online, go through the NAWIC website. Also, if you're based in Queensland, also, as you know, I'm always happy to take, I'm co-chair for education mentoring, so always happy to link people up with our Queensland president as well if that's needed. So, yeah, thank you for coming on. It was a great episode.
Thank you for having me, and great stuff happening here in Queensland with NAWIC. So absolutely, please take Lauren up on that offer.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
If this episode gave you new insights, don't let them go to waste. Take action, apply them. And if you want more insider strategies from the best in construction and infrastructure, make sure to subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the leaders who open the most doors aren't waiting for opportunities, they're building them.